When does a phenomenon become the unknown? When all attempts at understanding fail, and those who thirst for knowledge and understanding watch as research turns to ash in their mouth, as the phenomenon turns from a riddle to be solved into anomalous fascination. Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning in to episode 12 of the Anomalous Fascination podcast. Due to your continued support and new folks joining us every week, the show has continued to grow more and more. And I am so thrilled to have a show that has been described as, quote, extremely bingeable, end quote, by numerous people. As I say every week, the best way to help support the show is to tell a friend about it. You might be surprised at who will hop on board with you. This week, I'll be taking you all back on a trip to the early 1900s, when an event, only witnessed by a handful of people from different areas, still managed to make history. Despite how few witnessed the event, albeit from a great distance, it is still one of the first and most notable witnessings of its kind in human history. It was June 30th, 1908, in the eastern Siberian Taiga of Russia. Certainly it was among the warmer months of the year, which meant maybe getting up to as high as 50 degrees Fahrenheit during a real heat wave. Despite the area's climate not being the most hospitable, there were folks who lived around the area. Some of which were Evinki natives, while others were Russian settlers that had moved into the hills of the area. Regardless of who you were, however, one thing was for certain. The morning of June 30th, 1908, could not be missed if they wanted to. Several witness statements were taken following the incident, stating, quote, I was sitting by my house near the Vanavar trading post, which is about 40 miles or 65 kilometers south of the event's location. I suddenly saw that directly to the north, the sky split in two and fire appeared high and wide over the forest. The split in the sky grew larger, and the entire northern side was covered with fire. At that moment, I became so hot that I couldn't bear it. It was as if my shirt was on fire. I just wanted to tear my shirt off and throw it down. But then, the sky shut closed. End quote. That quote being from Mr. Semenov, a local resident of the area. Another quote from a local paper, quote, on the morning of the 30th of June around 9 a.m., we observed an unusual natural occurrence. The peasants in the area saw to the northwest, rather high above the horizon, some strangely bright, if not impossible to look at, bluish-white heavenly body, which for 10 minutes moved downwards. The body itself appeared as a cylinder, but the sky was cloudless, and it was so hot and dry. And that's from the Sibir newspaper, July 2nd, 1908. So, for several minutes, the witnesses of the area watched in wonder at an unbelievable sight. But as these and many other testimonies provide, the level and severity of the heat from dozens to hundreds of miles away was so immense that it felt like it could burn them alive. But despite the brilliant sights and feelings of heat, an already unforgettable experience for these people in the far north who probably didn't encounter much daily excitement, it would appear that this was merely an overture to something truly devastating. Let's take a stroll, shall we? Impact, detonation, burst, whatever you want to call it, it was unprecedented devastation. I intentionally left part of the witness testimonies out because what happened next was unbelievable. The light in the sky subdued very quickly, almost as if it had closed in on itself. And despite being dozens or hundreds of miles away, horrifying thumping sounds were heard over and over, coming closer. And then, a burst of air so strong, it threw almost every one of the witnesses back several meters, before the sound of earth cracking and quaking began in its aftermath. As the aftershock of this event left the ground absolutely trembling, at what scientists believe was roughly a 5.0 on the Richter scale for those far from the epicenter. And as many witnesses stated, quote, cracks began to form all over and looked of carved pathways, breaking doors off their hinges, and knocking over some barns that weren't already blasted by the massive airburst. There were reports all over of damage and destruction, and early newspaper reports quickly began calling the event a meteor strike, despite no one physically inspecting the area around the epicenter. Which, listen, it sounds strange, but it's 1908, it's the Taiga. It's a big ask to have folks travel 40 to 50 miles from the nearest settlement through a swath of destruction. The event itself resulted in likely 3 to 4 deaths, according to various witnesses, due to the extremely low population in the vicinity and the blast zone being completely unpopulated. However, to go over the significance of this blast, let's discuss this event's quote-unquote stat sheet, as it were. This explosion flattened or destroyed 80 million trees over an area of 2,150 square kilometers, or 830 square miles. This event registered at seismic stations all across both Europe and Asia, and the massive airburst from the event was detected in Germany, Denmark, Croatia, and the UK, and even as far away as the Dutch East Indies, which is present-day Indonesia, and Washington, D.C. Estimates of the energy released from the explosion range from 15 megatons to 30 megatons of TNT. The low end of that spectrum would be 1,000 times stronger than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. And the higher end would be 3/4 the energy released by Tsar Bomba, which is the most powerful nuclear warhead ever detonated. So what caused all of this? As I mentioned, the papers and most people assumed the event was caused by a meteor impact for quite some time. Because following the event, Russia had a lot of turmoil it was going through, between civil unrest in the country, followed by World War I, followed by the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. There just hadn't been much time or need to look into the matter. Finally, in 1921, a mineralogist, Leonid Kulik, formed a team with the Soviet Academy of Sciences and began conducting surveys of people from around the area of the event. After reviewing the results of his surveys, he came to the conclusion that it had to be a meteoric impact, at which point he convinced the Soviet government to fund an expedition to the suspected impact zone in order to salvage meteoric iron. Kulik set off in 1927 along with several native guides, searching for the impact crater of this event from 19 years before. However, as they walked through miles and miles of downed trees, they finally came upon an area where the trees were not felled. No, After miles and miles of trees lying on the ground like loose matches, they came upon a massive 5-mile circle of nothing but absolutely blackened, scorched trees, completely stripped of any branches. Clearly this had to be it, so they went inwards towards the center of the circle, expecting a giant crater to greet them. But in the most anticlimactic fashion, they searched all around the area with the scorched trees, and no impact crater could be found anywhere. Nothing but burnt, scarred earth. In fact, if you were to fly over this area today, you would see rich, lush, evergreen forests as far as the eye can see. And right in the center, a 5-mile patch of earth that looks like someone laid a massive pancake on top of the forest and just left it there. A flat, nearly perfect circle of mist-colored grass and dirt. I'd check it out, it's worth a Google. So, no impact crater. Then what exactly happened? Well, we still aren't entirely sure. But basically from 1927 to present day, all variety of investigations, research, testings, paper, books, etc. have been done on this event. The vast majority of people lean towards one theory in particular. Well, even then, not everyone agrees on a lot of the details. There are still some, quote, issues with even the most probable theories out there, as most researchers believe that this event was most likely caused by an airburst of an astronomical object. Now I say astronomical object because there's a massive split on whether they believe this was a meteorite, asteroid, or even comet. However, the one consistent is that they believe that upon entering Earth's atmosphere, the massive object got within 4 to 6 miles from the surface of the Earth and exploded, explaining the absence of a crater. If these theories are to be believed, then that would mean that this event is far and away the largest, quote, impact event in recorded history. Impact event is a term used specifically for collision of two astronomical objects, though obviously there were certainly more severe impacts in prehistoric times. If I seem skeptical or unconvinced of some of these theories, it's not that they're not extremely plausible, it's because every theory out there eventually hits a snag that renders it impossible, at least with our current information. So what are these theories and why can none of them fully explain this event? Let's take a quick break and I'll tell you all about it. So, what is the problem with these airburst theories that are so widely accepted as the most likely explanation for the Tunguska event? The problem is that first off, there's no evidence of any meteoric material anywhere. If it were a meteor or an asteroid, there would be chunks or shards of its material for miles. However, search teams have been looking for decades, each time coming with newer and more advanced technology, just to once again be left scratching their heads. This even includes more recent projects where people have actually been looking into the grains of trees in the area to see if there was anything embedded within the trees. This is largely why the small comet theory was proposed in the early 1930s. As a British astronomer by the name of F.J.W. Whipple, and yes, I think that name is awesome too, suggested a comet made of dust, frozen water, and frozen gases entered Earth's atmosphere and similarly exploded a few miles above, where its remaining matter was dispersed everywhere, and the water and frozen gases quickly thawed out and evaporated, before the remaining dust was finally dispersed into the air, which explained the dusty and hazy skies seen all across the world for several hours that day. In fact, this theory was widely accepted by most of the Soviet investigators in the 1960s, and they largely closed the book on the matter. But, as time goes on, more and more advanced technology is discovered. In fact, it was in September of 2020, only 4 months before this episode is being recorded, that a paper was written on this very subject. A professor and many of his peers ran numerous advanced computer simulations of various astronomical objects entering or interacting with Earth's atmosphere. He ran hundreds of simulations for comets of various compositions, particularly the composition described in the theory that is widely accepted in Russia. And despite various sizes, speeds, etc., the comets never made it further than 186 miles before completely evaporating. To have anything near the impact of the 1908 event, any astronomical body would have to travel at least 435 miles through the atmosphere, thereby completely removing comet from the list of possibilities. It's always remarkable to me how things keep changing, year after year. Of course, there hasn't been much time for responses to this paper, as it's only been a few months since it was written. But the counterproposal by this paper is that a massive asteroid simply entered into the Earth's atmosphere over Siberia, and as it traveled west, caused multiple massive air bursts, before finally leaving Earth's atmosphere over Europe, thus accounting for the lack of material found on Earth. But time will tell if this theory holds water when it comes to being scrutinized and compared to eyewitness testimonies and the severity of the damages caused on Earth. The only real curveball of a theory, not involving astronomical objects, was that this was caused by a massive pocket of natural gas within the Earth's crust that one day began leaking out, eventually sending 10 million tons of natural gas into the sky, until much of the gas reached proper density in the sky and began spreading outward. Until finally, lightning struck a portion of the gas, causing the entire thread of gas to catch fire, leading back to the main concentration of gas like a fuse, and detonating the whole pocket far up in the air. This is, in my opinion, the second coolest hypothesis out there, and though highly unlikely, it would certainly check all the boxes for the event. Now, as you may have noticed, I mentioned it being my second favorite theory, which means that, of course, I have a favorite. Because, as we've discussed in the past, when dealing with the territory of the unexplained, of course, aliens are always waiting in the shadows as a scapegoat. But this theory was a bit different than you might expect, because the one posed that is most well known is that a massive meteor was indeed approaching the surface of the Earth, one which would have decimated the Earth, possibly ending civilization. But, lucky for you and I, the aliens have a soft spot for us Earthlings, as the aliens, in an unprecedented move, played the hero by blasting the meteor out of the sky, just in time. And, you know what? That is absolute nonsense, but it is quite a heartwarming story, isn't it? So the mystery continues as this event remains unsolved, but with research continuing year after year, there's a good reason we call everything in science theories. Because no matter how sure we are about something, there's always a chance that tomorrow, something can change that could change the way we see everything. Thank you again for listening to this episode of Anomalous Fascination. If you'd like to keep in touch with the show, you can find me at AnomalyPod on Facebook and Twitter, or email me at anomalousfascination@gmail.com. And if you love the show, hop on Apple Podcasts and leave the show a nice 5-star rating and review. Or even just tell a friend about it. And until next time, thanks for listening.